So, just kind of a final little bit here on some lenses and accessories for the Nikon D7000 owner. The first thing that you should know about is the differences in lenses. And Nikon has two different series of lenses. They have the FX lenses and the DX lenses. Now the DX lenses are indicated by the DX on the lens. The FX lenses are not indicated with anything. So the only way to tell if it's a DX lens is if it says DX, and if it doesn't, then it's not. That's just the way it is. So, different lenses are designed to do different things. The FX lens has been designed for full frame, 35 millimeter type sensors, and the DX lens is designed for smaller frames, the 1.5 crop that this camera has. So when you shoot with an FX lens, it has a very large projection of a circle onto the sensor, and it's covering that sensor from corner to corner, okay? The DX lens, specially designed for the smaller sensor, and the lenses are sometimes a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter weight, and less money, has just big enough of a circle to fit the sensor on the smaller size. Now, if you want to take your DX lens and you want to upgrade to a full frame camera, and you take your DX lens and put it on that camera, you're going to end up with what's called a vignetting problem, a darkening of the corners. And that is generally considered an undesirable thing to have. Now, as an owner of a D7000, if you want to buy a DX lens, that's not a problem, because what's going to happen then is it's going to project a very large image, and your sensor is only going to see a certain portion of it, but it's going to be a very good portion of the image. So you're going to get this cropped frame of view, essentially. And so if you are thinking about upgrading to a full frame camera, you might want to invest more in FX lenses than in DX lenses, but you can certainly use any of the current Nikon lenses on this camera, which is one of the great things about this camera. So with that in mind, the standard lens that comes with the camera is a DX lens. It's an AFS lens. It's got the silent wave motor in it, 18 to 105 with an aperture of 3.5 to 5.6, and it's a good general purpose standard lens. But there's a lot of other things out there. If you're like most people and the first thing you want is a little bit more of a telephoto lens, the best matching telephoto lens, in my opinion, is the 70 to 300. This is a vibration reduction lens. Reaching out to 300 is quite a bit more than the 100. So if you're looking at photographing travel or landscape or maybe even some sports, this is going to let in a lot more light. Kind of an upgrade telephoto, and this is actually an older lens, is the 80 to 200 2.8. Now they make a new version of the 70 to 200 2.8, but it's more than twice as much money in this as this one. I think this one is a really good buy. It's a very sharp lens, and it's got a very fast aperture. It's f2.8. So compared to the standard lens, it's letting in 4 times as much light, and it's got twice the magnification on it. And so this is a nice lens to look at, and it also has vibration reduction. There's a lot of lenses, but I'm just going to show you a few of the basics. Nikon came out with a normal lens for the DX sensor. It's a 35 millimeter 1.8 lens. And if you bought it with the kit lens and you're looking for something else, this is a great lens to have. It's just a general purpose lens. You can already do what this can as far as focal length, but the 1.8 aperture means you're going to be able to shoot in low light conditions and with very shallow depth of field if you want. So it does open up some new doors to you. The standard 50 millimeter lens is also a good option. Now they make actually a couple of versions of this. They have a 1.4 as well as a 1.8, and this makes for a really nice portrait lens, and it's probably one of the best bangs for the buck in getting a good lens, because you get to shoot in low light, you get shallow depth of field. It's a really nice look with this lens. If you're into close-up work, they make a good macro lens that also makes a pretty good portrait lens. It's not as fast, but it's much better at focusing close up. So if you have a desire to photograph things very, very closely, you want to take a postage stamp and fill the frame, you can do it with this lens. One of the biggest options on this camera is the external battery grip, the MB-D11. It's the multi-power battery pack. And so this is something that you might add on there for a couple of reasons. Number one, it has its own battery, so you now have 2 batteries in the camera, so the cameras will last longer. It's on one charge, essentially. It'll give you a bigger grip, so if you have big hands, And if you shoot a lot of vertical stuff, so you're shooting portraits a large percentage of the time, it gives you a vertical shutter release that's more comfortable to use. If you do that sort of work, a lot of portrait wedding work, you might be interested in the vertical grip. The battery that it takes is an EN-EL15. You can find this from Nikon. There are also some generic manufacturers that make the batteries for less money. I haven't seen them damage the camera, but they may not provide all the chip information that tells you how many shots you've taken and all the battery information, and they may not last as long. The lens hood is supplied in the kit. If you don't have a lens hood with your lens, I would highly recommend getting one and using one on a regular basis. It blocks light from hitting the front of the lens, which is what causes flare and reduces contrast in situations. And so I try to keep a lens hood on my camera at all times. And the one for the 18-105 is the HB32, but there is a unique one for every lens. And so you would want to check to see what the exact lens hood that you need for your lens. For keeping the sensor clean, putting the camera in the mirror lockup mode, you can use a bulb blower like this to blow in some clean air to potentially knock off dust that is hanging on the sensor. Good device to have. You don't need to have any skill on how to use it. You just squeeze your hand and blow a bunch of air inside the sensor to help clean it off. If you have this camera, you've already probably purchased a memory card, so you're familiar with the fact that it uses 1 or 2 SD memory cards. SD is available in 3 different forms: SDHC, SDXC, basically are extended and larger capacity versions of the card, and this camera can handle all of those. You'll notice on the side of the cards is a write protection switch. If you flip that switch, you won't be able to delete the card, you won't be able to reformat the card, so it's a way to lock in data to the card, you might say, so that it's not accidentally written over. If you shoot a lot of video, you'll probably want to get a card that is a class 6 or faster. For general shooting, class 4 is fine. If you're shooting with high-end video cameras, you might be at class 10, but there's a classification on the memory cards that talks about how fast they are. And this will also indicate how fast it downloads to your computer. Speaking about downloading to your computer, a great way to get the images to your computer, rather than transferring them through the camera, is through a card reader. I highly recommend an external card reader. You don't need any software. It's faster than using the camera, and it potentially allows your camera to be off shooting pictures while your one card is being downloaded. You don't have to have the camera to download the images. And there's a number of good ones on the market. We have a couple of ones listed from B&H at the Creative Live website. Flash. Nikon does a really good job at flash, and this is one area I would highly recommend sticking with Nikon's name in the flash unit. The 400 is not a flash I would recommend unless the flash in this camera breaks and you just want the smallest, simplest thing possible. If you're going to get a flash, get something that adds a little bit more power to it. For most people, I think the SB700 is a good intermediate level flash. It's going to add more power. It's going to get the flash further away from the lens, which is important, and it's going to allow you to twist and bounce the flash off of ceilings and walls. If you really get into flash, they make an SB900, which has more power and more versatility and more tricks that it can do. For the average photographer, the SB700 is probably the right one, but if you're really into it and you need that extra power or extra features, look for the SB900. And then finally, to fire the shutter release without touching the camera. Important for getting the sharpest pictures possible, you can get the wired cable release, which is the MC-DC2, which plugs into the side of the camera, or you can get the wireless remote. Each one kind of has their benefits and drawbacks, depends on your style of shooting. If you're the type of person that likes to get in the picture with your friends, the wireless remote is nice because then you can kind of just put it into the remote mode and take the picture whenever you're ready. If you're working from a tripod and you're doing landscape type photography, I'd be more inclined to be with the cable release. And so as we bring our class to a close, I'll just let you know that my name is John Greengo. You can go to my website to find out more information about the classes I teach. You may want to check out our Fundamentals of Digital Photography here at Creative Live. It's a great 10-week class if you want to know more about digital, more about photography. I do a great 10-week class that goes into all the shutter speeds, depth of field, lenses, composition, all of that, and it's a great starting point. Here at Creative Live, we have a lot of great classes that are very advanced in nature, and this is kind of the good beginning one to start with. If you happen to live in the Seattle or Portland area, I do teach a number of classes as well as lead tours, and so you can check out my website for more information about that. And so we're going to go ahead and finish up taking some questions and answers, but I'll say right now, thanks a lot for tuning in and taking part in the D7000 class.
Yes, thank you all. We have a question from Piranha that says, why is Creative Live so awesome?
I don't know the answer to that one. There's some
Adam
pretty
does.
awesome people that are working here, that's for sure.
Adam in the booth says because he works here.
Like I said, there's some awesome people working here.
I have to call him out sometimes because I can hear Adam in my headpiece. No one else can, but he's a big part of Creative Live, so we gotta give him a shout out. Great class, John. Again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
I learned a ton. How about you guys? Did you guys get a lot out of this? Looks like we got a thumbs up in the classroom. So should we just go ahead and move on to some questions? Take it away, Kate.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many more questions we have. We have a few, and then we've got 2 more winners to announce before we sign off.
Excellent. Okay.
Which have been chosen.
So we'll do a few questions, a few winners.
Yeah, I've been kind of harassing the chat room, asking them, okay, where's your questions? Because, and I'm surprised because usually we have a ton, but it looks like we have a few, but we've gotten a lot of them answered. So
Well,
you've
you
been
know,
extremely thorough.
not having questions either is good or bad. Either I already answered them in the class, or people have just tuned off.
I think it's really good because you've been extremely thorough, and a lot of the questions have been really in depth. So, I mean, we do have some, but I'm kind of surprised, and I think it's a good thing.
Hopefully so.
That's my opinion. All right, so let's see. Director Boy had asked, if set to single point in AFS and center weighted, where does the focus point fall? Also, because the point that the exposure measurement is made. Okay, that doesn't really, I don't really understand
There's
that.
a bit of a jumble going on
It
here.
is.
Because we're talking about, there's focusing and there's metering. And in this particular camera, those two things are separate. So we can choose spot metering, which is this little tiny area in the middle. We can choose center weighted, which is a bigger spot. Or we can choose matrix, which is choosing a whole matrix of spaces. Now when it comes to focus, you can choose a single point and you can adjust what point that is. And so a very dangerous way to set your camera up is in spot metering in the middle and focusing over here. And you could see a potential problem if you're focusing and your subject's over here and this is pointed at some black background or white background that your subject is not like at all. It could throw off your meter completely. And so you do want to be very careful using that spot meter. And I'm not sure if that's where they were getting to, but I'll just make that point anyway.
It sounded to me like they were saying, how do you move the focus on the back? Okay, yeah, I don't know if this is right, but it sounded to me like they were asking how they move the single focus point
Right.
inside the viewfinder.
Okay, so this is something that could be a little bit confusing, and I don't know if this is going to answer it, but this will answer some other people's questions. When you do have it set to the single point focusing, so that's the button on the side of the camera, and by turning the front dial to the just one little dot in there. Now, when you hold the camera up to your eye and you press the button on the back of your camera here, that will move the focusing point around, but it doesn't do it in this viewfinder on the top, in this LCD display. It'll do it in the viewfinder, but not on the LCD. And so if I want to focus way over on the right, I will activate the camera, tab over to the right, and I'm focused over here. But in the LCD, this isn't quite accurate. It's just showing the center point. And so that information is slightly different, and be aware of that.
Okay, a quick question about using a remote shutter or the shutter release.
Cable release, yeah.
Can you start video recording with that same cable release?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, all right.
I'm pretty sure you can't.
And the questions are just flooding in now that I had to go and say there are no questions. So,
Let's take the best of them.
well, Mur had asked earlier if you could explain again what focus point wrap is. That wasn't very clear to them.
Oh, okay. You have 39 focus points, and I forget how many there are, but there's about like 10 over here. And if you go all the way over here, and you want to go back over here, if you wrap it around, it just, one click goes all the way over here, which is kind of nice. So if you're over on the right-hand side, I'll do it for the TV. If you're on the left-hand side and you go left, it would wrap around to this side instantaneously. And so it's, I don't know, it's the magical area where it just kind of switches over to the other side. Does that make sense? For most people are shaking.
Makes sense.
So you don't have to go click, 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 click.
And B. Miller had also asked, when would you want to use the 3D or 39-point focus?
You know, I unfortunately have not had a chance to really test this camera out on a variety of sports modes, which is where the 39-point and the 3D tracking is going to come in most handy. It's kind of in theory, the 3D tracking is a new thing in this camera, and I am kind of waiting to see how the sports photographers like it. Because it's kind of using new software to track things, and that's why I'm recommending to anyone to see how it works for the type of action that they shoot. As I said before, it may work great for soccer, but it doesn't work good for basketball. It depends on how that action is, the lens that you use, and so forth. In theory, they're working somewhat similarly. The 3D, from my understanding, is using not only the focus, but it's using the tonality and the colors of the subject to help track it. And so it potentially has more capability to track the focusing, but that may depend on the types of subject you're shooting.
I've seen a few questions coming in about Lightroom and tethered shooting. And do you know if Lightroom supports this newer camera model yet?
I don't know if it does at this time. It does?
It does?
It does,
Cool.
okay. We have in-class confirmation. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you.
Rita had asked if you could talk about the basic settings you would recommend for shooting video.
You know, for shooting video, it's going to depend on how you set this camera up, because in the auto mode, the mom and pop just shooting their kid just because they want a short little video mode, I would leave it in the automatic settings and try to pre-focus ahead of time and shoot with generally a wide angle lens. If you're more serious into video, you know how to set your camera up. I'm not going to tell you. I know a fair bit about video, but I'm sure you know as much as I know on video. But there you're going to be more in manual exposure, selecting your focus, and using other equipment besides this, whether it's a fluid head or other device to hold or mount or brace the camera. But the video mode, you're going to have to try to play around with it. It's not the best video camera in the world. It's capable of incredible video. It's just not the best video camera in the world.
Oakley had asked, what prime lens do you think is the sharpest?
Well, there's places that do testing on the sharpest lenses, and in general it's going to be a telephoto lens, but I've heard really good things if you've got the spare change for a 200 millimeter f2. It's, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 grand, something like that.
I'll just purchase one of those next week.
Yeah.
It's on my
Just
wish
what
list,
everybody
I'm just
needs.
kidding. Yeah.
Passenger had asked, when I take video in 1080, I have a hard time playing it back without being choppy. Should I be using a specific software for playback on the computer?
The playback on the computer, you know, once again, I'm not a huge video expert, but that's likely to be the software. The .movie file is kind of a chunky file from what I've heard. It's kind of thick and slow running, so you do need a very fast computer. The file is probably fine, but if you had a fast enough computer, it may run more smoothly. And so it's probably not a defect with your camera recording. However, check the speed of your card. If it's not a fast enough card, it could potentially drop frames and make it look choppy. So you probably want a class 6 card or higher for shooting the video. It's hard to determine exactly where that problem is starting.
Next question. Abhi had asked if you could give some tips for time lapse during sunset photography, how to set the camera because the exposure changes continuously during a sunset sunrise.
Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions about that?
I was going to ask him if he finds some, if he could let me know, because shooting a time lapse during the sunset is great if you want to get the sun going down and going dark, or if you want to get it light coming up. But getting that transition, the problem with this camera, with all still cameras, is that the increments that we change exposures on this is 1/3 of a stop. and we need it to be more exacting than that. It would be nice to have 1/100th of a stop, because 1/3 of a stop is actually fairly large when you get into the increments of light changes during sunset. And it's hard to get that with this type of camera, because you're trying to adjust for the light, and when you adjust 1/3, that's a big jump. And so it's rather difficult to shoot time lapses going through a sunset. There are special high-end video cameras that are designed for controlling it better than this camera, but they're really expensive.
I think we're about done with questions. Do you have any more? At least on this one list,
Giveaways,
sorry,
giveaways,
yeah.
giveaways.
Yeah, let's do some giveaways. I mean, the questions are, you know,
We've got most
we
of them.
pretty much
We've
covered.
done well on the questions.
okay, all right.
All right, time to give away a couple of more prizes. We have one more R-strap, one more Black Rapid R-strap, and a Bar Lenses gift certificate. So the first one is going to go to @Kinstead, who tweeted, "Settings, these are all seasoning to flavor as you like it," which is awesome. And the other prize is going to go to Troy the Watson, who said every camera should come with a Greengo and a Black Rapid in the box. So sorry, had to pick it. It was just too awesome.
And thank you for tweeting out.
Thanks.
And thank you to Black Rapid and Borrowed Lenses for, and also I want to give a shout out to B&H.
Yeah, supplying this very camera right here.
Exactly. So, and we do have a specific link from Creative Live that if you purchase the B&H products through Creative Live, it helps us out. So we'll put that in the chat room.
Yeah, B&H has been a big supporter of ours here, and so those of you who like this free learning and cheap learning and online learning, they've been a big help out with a lot of the equipment, from the camera right here to some of the other equipment in the office. And we have links with all the accessories that we talked about at the end of the class today, about model numbers and so forth and how to get them.
And free learning is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But also if you purchase this course now, it's still $29.
So you can watch it over again and go back through all the custom menus and get that set right.
The best thing after free learning is very cheap learning.
You're right.
Also, I wanted to say a comment in the chat room from G-Blink, who's one of our regulars. Wanted to know what your next class is here at Creative Live, John.
Ooh, that is unknown.
And I would like to know that too.
I'm hazarding a guess that that new Canon T3i probably needs a class on it. Not that it's going to help people out in the Nikon class, but just keep hoping and pushing Nikon to come out with the D300 S2 or whatever they
How
call
about
it.
the D800?
The
I think is-
D800.
I think we're
We'll do a
hearing
class on that.
D400, D800, and
Yeah.
D4.
Can I vote? I vote on Lightroom 3.
Lightroom 3.
Yeah,
Lightroom
Lightroom 3
3,
would be
that's
good.
what I want.
That
There's a
would
whole
be
class
very
on that.
good.
So also, folks, please join us tomorrow. We have a workshop going on with Vincent LaFerre. Very excited about that 3-day workshop on DSLR to video. So very excited about that.
That's awesome. He is an awesome one, and for all those people who are interested in video, take your day off work and call in sick and tune in.
You're going to learn. You are going to learn a lot this weekend. So thanks again, John. It was a great class.
Thanks a
you,
lot
thank
for
you.
helping out, and thanks to all the students in class and around the world.
Yeah, and thank you, Creative Live.